While you've been in Australia, you've spoken a lot about the relationship that law should have with justice, and you've spoken about unjust laws. But when corrupt and unjust laws are enforced by a corrupt and unjust government, what hope is there for reform?
Yes, the Roman Dutch law, which was the common law, had some of the provisions in relation to fairness and reasonableness. The courts could not override the provisions of acts of parliament. There was parliamentary supremacy. But delegated legislation to regulate the activities of people on the municipal or provincial level could be challenged. There was some room for some of us lawyers to go to court and say that this provision is unjust, therefore the regulation is invalid on the ground of discrimination or because it is unreasonable. There were these limits, and there were judges who tried hard to infuse some sort of fairness into the harsh provisions of the laws of apartheid. Not always successful, but as time went on, more and more people realized that the patent injustice committed against people of color were completely unreasonable. The international community condemned the South African practices. There was a suspension of South Africa from the United Nations, and the decision that apartheid laws were inhuman and violation of fundamental human rights. They suspended South Africa. There was a sports boycott, including not playing cricket and rugby with Australia and New Zealand. There were financial sanctions. The banks of the United States and the UK, to a lesser extent, and Switzerland would not renew short-term loans, and things piled up. Pressure within the United Democratic Front contending that the country should become ungovernable. The international sanctions led to, from about 85, to a tendency that some solution would have to be found. Political prisoners such as Mr. Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, and thousands of others were political prisoners on Robben Island and other prisons throughout the country. There were laws, so-called anti-terrorism laws, and you were a terrorist if you really disagreed with the government policy. There were thousands of people detained without trial. The economy suffered, and the talks were started in '85 about the conditional release of Mr. Mandela, something that Mr. Mandela was not prepared to accept. He declared publicly through his young daughter, Zinzi, at a meeting to celebrate Bishop Tutu's receipt of the Nobel Prize, that my father says, she said, from a written document written by him, that he will not accept a conditional release. He had gone to prison for life, and he was prepared to sacrifice his life in terms of his statement in order that there should be democracy and equality and lack of oppression in the country, and that he wanted to be the last political prisoner to be released. They must release everyone else, and there must be a democratic reform. And it took almost 5 years before the very super conservative President Botha resigned, and President de Klerk took over, who had a more pragmatic approach to the matters, and an attempt was made to try and settle the differences. I think that the nationalists thought that there would be a sort of compromise, that the power would remain in their hands. But it didn't work that way. Illegitimate regimes are at their weakest point when they start giving in partially, and thinking, well, you know, the other side would be satisfied by partial achievement of its aims and objectives. Mr. Mandela's party, the African National Congress, wasn't prepared to have anything of that, and there had to be fundamental change of a unitary state with universal franchise and a Bill of Rights which guaranteed the equality of all people, irrespective of their ethnic origin or of the color of their skin or their gender. And we worked on a constitution and a Bill of Rights, which and the Constitutional Court to interpret the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and enforce it on the basis that all individuals were equal before the law. And that worked out. And there was an election in 1994, which Mr. Mandela's party got over 60% of the vote, and he was elected president. The Constitutional Court came into operation and abolished the death penalty, provided for equality in all respects by all the citizens. And we became, for the first time, a democratic country with a constitution and a Bill of Rights.